Will democracy survive the next couple of years?
Essentially, we are the same.
There are so many needs that Minnesota has.
What people are saying they need right now.
Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is life illuminated. By Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan. Acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians, a Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology, look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome to this version of Access to Democracy. We have as our guest today the Senator, Honorable, I'm going to call you Senator because
Sure.
That's your title to be called, your title of your highest last elected office. But you're here today, or the reason I'm getting you here today is because you've recently written a book, When Republicans Were Progressive. And so what I want to do today is to focus on you, David Durenberger, and who you are. But I think this book and talk about When Republicans Were Progressive is a good entree to that. So I'm going to start by asking, Senator, why did you write this book?
Because the longest serving president of the Minnesota Historical Society told me I had to write a book on Republicans in Minnesota. He did that shortly before he died, and I asked him why. Why me? And he said, because you knew, number one, because Minnesota has always been a Republican state, not a Democratic state, a Republican state.
Historically.
From its history and Alexander Ramsey, second governor in 1860 on.
Oh, it goes back to Father Abraham Lincoln, doesn't it?
It does indeed. But for the 60 years that I write about, from the election of Harold Stassen in 1938 to that of Arne Carlson, or the end of Arne Carlson's term and of my term in the mid-90s, we were a unique kind of Republican, a Minnesota kind of a Republican. That is, we would not only define a problem, but we would define it in a way that invited Democrats, Republicans, independents, whatever, to participate in solving it.
Do you still consider yourself a progressive Republican?
Yes, because I was born and raised a Republican. My friends early on were Republican. My best friends today still are Republicans, although some of them have switched parties, but I still think of them as progressive Republicans. So
what does it mean to be a progressive Republican? And a progressive Republican from Minnesota.
Yeah. It means that you can't rest without addressing the problems that beset the majority of citizens of your state. And this is a tradition that goes all the way back to where we all came from and why we came to America, why our ancestors came to America. They came here for a better life, not just for themselves, but for others. They brought their religions with them. They brought their churches with them. They brought their values with them. They brought all the best instincts that caused them to leave the old country for the new. And all of those are still here. And they started with the 13 colonies, and they came west. And that's what I learned early on, and I reaffirmed it when I was in the United States Senate. And that's why I wrote the book.
Okay. You know, it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The definition of the pursuit of happiness is a theory of government that comes from Plato and Aristotle. It means to provide the maximum opportunity for the maximum number of people to achieve happiness. Does that kind of describe what you do as a
I think that's the essence of it. But what you do is deal with the realities that isn't, number one, it's not perfectly possible.
Yes.
You can't always get it done.
That's why you and I disagreed with Humphrey from
Yeah,
time to time.
exactly. You know, but the important is doing it, trying it, you know, and unless you are willing to continue to try to solve readily identifiable problems and not so readily identifiable problems, you shouldn't be in public office. Okay. That's how simple it is.
So you're a product of Stearns County, St. John's University. Your dad was athletic director. Stearns County, you know, a lot of Germans up there, whatever. Some people might be a little surprised that a progressive Republican was nurtured in that crucible. What was there about your growing up in Stearns County and the atmosphere that shaped you as you are?
First off, Stearns is just one of probably 8 or 9 or 10 counties in what they call the Holy Land, traditionally in Minnesota. It goes all the way up to Wadena.
Okay.
In the Holy Land, we did a lot of funny things, like we didn't like prohibition. So we, on the farms, invented our own form of taking on prohibition.
So I mean there were a bunch of scufflaws up there in Stearns
Well,
County?
whatever we would call ourselves, we thought we were doing good by a lot of people that the politicians, like Ships, whatever his name was, the guy that did carry,
Ships did, yeah.
You know, whatever. You know, we were doing right by the people, and but that's the essence of it. You know, so we protested prohibition because of where we, you know, the way we assessed our values. Right next door, in fact, on the main drag of Paynesville, Minnesota, where 2 counties were separated, they were very different kind. They were very Orthodox Christians, and they didn't, it's okay to take communion, but, you know, that's been blessed in some way. So that's, you know, follow me, I think.
Was yours growing up a little bit kind of a relativism as far as you chose what worked, what was common sense?
No, it's relative only in that you are who you are taught to become by your parents, by your family, by your surroundings. In my case, the Benedictine monks. When I was growing up, St. John's was the largest monastery in the world of monks who followed St. Benedict. And they were all educated in the best universities in the world. They were the best teachers. They were the best role models. And they built young people into what, you know, we have become and what St. John's has become over time.
So that's where you went to school?
Yes. I went there I had Franciscan nuns for grade school, and each nun taught four grades, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Then the other one taught 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. So the 1st grader is able to listen to the 2nd and 3rd and 4th graders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Really, honest to God.
Well, I understand your mother picked you out for high achievement early on, but I'm going to talk another name, Fred Hughes, and some of the other people up in St. Cloud, Stearns County. What kind of influence did they have?
Fred Hughes and my father met as freshmen in college on the road coming in from what's now I-94, going up to Fargo. They met on the road coming into St. John's. They were both freshman students, one from Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, Fred, and one from Le Sueur, Minnesota, my dad. They became the best of friends. These were the people my folks admired, and vice versa. And Fred was an ardent, progressive Republican. He was one of the first people to support Harold Stassen. He talked Lawrence Duck Hall, who was the Democrat leader of the Minnesota legislature, into becoming a Republican and a Speaker of the House when Stassen was elected. That's what Fred did. Then he also raised up some good kids, including a son who became a state senator.
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned Fred because he was your mentor and a teacher. I mean, I consider him one. So you grew up in an atmosphere where progressive Republicans' ideas were promoted kind of all around you.
Yes, no question about it. Not just by politicians, but by a lot of ordinary people as well.
And so you went to law school and you associated with Harold Levander, former Governor Harold Levander. What are the events that led you to associate with, as I recall it, in 1966, Harold was the most conservative, at least identified that way, of the four viable candidates for governor. So what led you to be a lawyer and associate with Harold?
Because Harold came out of Stas's law firm. So Harold was always being mentioned as a candidate, but he was never a candidate. His brother Pete Levander was a party chairman, an ardent supporter and staff member for Harold Stassen. And I knew this through Fred Hughes and lots of other people. I eventually got to be a senior in law school and needed a job. So I was president of my law fraternity, and we invited a man named Harold Levander to come and speak. And he did. And while we were sitting there, the two of us, I said, I'm looking for a job. He said, I'm looking for a lawyer. And
That's how it happened.
That's exactly how it happened.
Well, but this was, you practiced law in South
I didn't
St.
know that ahead of time.
Yeah, you practiced law in South St. Paul, I think it was about 7 years, right, with Harold Levander?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But there's a fulcrum there with Harold, because in '66 he decided to run for governor.
Right.
Were you active in his campaign and supported him?
Of course, everybody in the firm was. His whole family, Paul Magnuson, who became a federal judge. Guess who appointed? But and I, we just took time off to go to all the precinct caucuses and line up all the people we could, hustling our former JC friends and our Knights of Columbus in my case, and Paul did Gustavus alumni, and Gene and Tom went out to Levander's kids, and we hustled everybody we could, and ended up at a convention that had 4 candidates.
But Harold was not supposed to win the nomination and the endorsement, because that belonged to the Young Turks from Hennepin County and their candidate, John Pillsbury. So how did it happen? This country lawyer from South St. Paul, and Harold was a good speaker, but his personality wasn't, the type that you say is a glad-hander. How did it happen that he won?
It happened because he was the one best qualified for the job at that time. It happened because he had a great campaign managers, and both Art Gillen, a former state senator, and eventually Senator Paul Overgaard, the state senator from Albert Lee. It happened because once he was endorsed by the party, and in a long, whatever it was, 16 ballots or something like that, former Governor Elmer Anderson pulled out, but cut a deal so that they would cut down the endorsing that it took. That's how he made it.
So was it a hard decision on your part to leave the practice of law and to join his office as chief of staff? You were chief of staff for Harold.
Right. Yeah, it was a decision that I just spent a lot of time with my wife on, because we had 3 small children who were at that time aged 4, 3, and 1, and she was pregnant. So it was a tough decision and a really hard one. And she said, look, you have an instinct. He asked you. Who better to ask you to join him than a governor-elect? He obviously knows something about you we don't know.
So, as I recall, Harold's salary as governor back then was $32,000 a year.
And mine was $11,000.
11?
$11,000 a year.
But okay, I think when Harold left the law office, he was grossing about $100,000, probably netting $75,000 to $80,000. As a lawyer, you were taking
making
home
more than $11,000.
You were making more than $11,000.
I wouldn't have had 3 kids and a 4th one on the way.
That's not a whole lot of money.
Nope.
So was Judy, your wife, instrumental, or what was the thing that tipped to cause you?
Well, of course she did. I mean, it was her decision. It was really her decision to make.
Really?
She knew I would love to do it. She knew that I was good at it, would be good at it. I'd been a JC president. We won national honor. She thought I was, made for this kind of a job. But I said, wait a minute. I'm principally a husband and a father. And she said, you'll always be a husband and a father.
Really?
Yeah.
So, what was it like working for Harold Levander as his chief of staff?
Well, it was different because right off the bat, a man who the new governor who hadn't had a role in developing the Republican platform, all of a sudden said to the state legislative leaders, there was a Republican majority, 2/3 majority.
Really?
In the House, almost 2/3 in the Senate.
Well, they were liberal and conservative then, but
but still they blended.
Yeah.
in the middle, along with Democrats at that time, or liberals as they were called. And Harold's instruction to these people, because he didn't know a lot about it, I'm putting words in his mouth, was pass the party platform. That's the genius of this book, if anything. It says Levander's passed 2/3 of the party platform into law. And it was all those things you mentioned, from Metropolitan Council and the first Human Rights Department of the state and a bunch of things like that, or you will mention, as the case may
no,
be.
I'm going to go back.
No, but an incredible party at the time that wrote its policy platform at the precinct caucus level, which was the town hall meeting of every little town in Minnesota. That's what a progressive Republican was doing.
Okay. See, Harold, and as disclosure here, I practiced law with Harold Levander for 18 years. He told me he kept a copy of the platform in the lower drawer of his governor's desk and would periodically take it out and look at it and see how well he was doing.
Yeah, everybody with any kind of an ego, and lawyers have them. You may deny it, but lawyers lawyers have it. They want to win, right? And Harold wanted to win. And while he may not have understood the background of all of these sort of things, he had confidence in the people that did, even though they were young Turks from Hennepin County who had opposed him with their own candidate, or Elmer's friends from Ramsey County who had opposed him with their candidate, as the case may be. He wanted to win.
So were you working with good people in the legislature, or was it difficult?
They were exceptional people.
Why are they exceptional?
Because they were my age, for the most part. And they were lawyers, or they were other professionals, or they were teachers, or whatever the case may be. And they came from as far away as northwestern Minnesota, up in Warren County someplace, or Duluth, or even the Range, or down southern Minnesota. But they were, in their communities, they were a pretty big deal. They were taking on a job in the legislature that was a part-time job. Their full-time job was something else. They were farmers, teachers, educators, healthcare people, whatever. They had a part-time job as a legislator once every 2 years for about 4 months at a time. So they were smart. They were able to work together. They were able to attract people from the other party. They were able to get the job done, and then they were able to go home and work their regular jobs.
So today there's a lot of discussion about the rural, urban, and outstate Minnesota divide. Did these legislators focus on Minnesota as a whole?
Absolutely. And there was yes, I would say that those who did not come from Minneapolis, St. Paul were more conservative, inclined to be more conservative. But they had, and that helped offset some of these young Turks from Hennepin County in their efforts to use government for this, and this. The conservatives would say, now wait a minute, is there not a better way? Should we not, for example, use the state to help finance the tax costs of public education? Is that not possible? That would equally benefit people in both areas.
Now, I'm going to just list a number of the accomplishments. And I mean, you were part of a transition to the structural innovation in government. I mean, some people say that Harold was the first modern governor. And you had regional government development, you had the Met Council, you had the Department of Human Rights, the Pollution Control Agency, Crystal Waters. That's quite a progressive legacy.
The state college system was created, with an official board and an official leader at the same time. We guaranteed that there would be higher education available either in technical or in traditional college within 35 miles of every Minnesotan as a result of that session.
Oh, that's pretty.
That's unusual.
It's unusual,
yeah, particularly in today's terms. Right.
Okay, now, you and I have known each other for a long time. And I'm going to read from Vice Panel. It says that the attitude of some of the young Turks and the liberals and Democrats to Harold, they said they considered Harold Levander old hat, but found in Levander's chief of staff, David Durenberger, a like-minded reformer. Together, the legislature, Democrats with Durenberger and with Levander's amiable acquiescence, were able to craft a remarkable record of achievement. Now, is Vice Panel giving you too much credit here?
No, Paul, what people need to remember, and I think is that I'm the same person today that I was then. And I could say that about each of these people you're talking about, whether they opposed Levander or not in the Republican Party. They are the same people today as they were then. They were active in the Citizens League, today at the Civic Caucus. They're involved in something bigger than themselves, more important to people than themselves. Today, then. I'm one of them, but that's the way we were. These are the people that made Minnesota what it is today.
So I fear we're going to run out of time, but you had a distinguished career in the United States Senate. Elected in '78. You first ran for governor, didn't you?
Yes.
Why did you switch?
Because Al Quie wanted to be a governor. That simple.
And so is there a
And then Muriel Humphrey decided at the last minute in April of 1978 she didn't want to be a senator. So she wouldn't run for re-election in November. So the Republicans who wanted Quie to come back from Washington said, Dave, you go to Washington for us.
Okay. The time we have, you served with some very, very highly qualified and distinguished people in the U.S. Senate. So who are some of the people that you would pick out that you admired, and how did you get things done?
Well, the first thing I'd say about the Senate that I went into in 1978 is very few of the 100 senators needed that job. Think of that in today's terms.
Oh, yeah.
They were something else. There were 2 astronauts of that group. 2 astronauts, for example. There were at least 8 or 9 major business chief executives, people who had been successful in some other phase of their life, and of course good lawyers, good academicians, and so forth. There were stellar stars like Pat Moynihan. Nobody smarter in the world.
You served with Moynihan?
Daniel Patrick Moynihan of New York, who was, you couldn't tell whether he was a Democrat or a Republican. His mind was going all the time. He had great ideas. I served with Scoop Jackson, one of the outstanding foreign relations, national security experts from the state of Washington. And I'm naming Democrats because I could do the same thing on the Republican side, obviously, particularly after Ronald Reagan took office in 1981.
So how about William Cohen? He just came out yesterday lamenting how the Senate Republicans today do not have the courage to call out Trump for some of these. Is William Cohen a credible person to criticize?
Yeah, Bill Cohen was the smartest guy in our class. There were 19 people in our class. I was the one that took office first, so I got the first choice, and I got all the good committees. I got Russell Long as my chairman in Finance Committee. He's the one who explained to me that, when every state is heard from, 2 at a time, the United States Senate, you get good national policy. Whether it's especially good for Louisiana or Minnesota, not important. It's the decision made by 50 states. And Bill Cohen was one of those people. Bill Cohen left, came into my class, and he left to be Secretary of Defense to Bill Clinton.
Okay. So, I find, who are some of the friends? Who are people you were close to? Because, friendship is an important thing in the Senate. How about Ted Kennedy and some of these others?
Yeah, there's friendship and there's relationships.
Okay.
And I could say, in terms of friends, the people that are with you when the going gets tough, or to pull you down when it's going to your head. Guys like Alan Simpson and
out of Wyoming, huh?
Yeah, of Wyoming, and Nancy Kassebaum from Kansas, and people like that were what I would call, because they still are personal friends. But the big point you're making here is that Republicans on purpose destroyed the building of relationships, personal relationships. Gingrich and those guys, starting with the ethics issues and all that sort of stuff in the 1980s to try to get rid of the Speaker of the House and all that sort of thing, carried that through in 1995, and they told their newly elected congressmen and senators, keep your families at home. Don't bring them to Washington, D.C., where they can grow up like my 4 boys did. They can grow up with everybody else. They can experience the same kinds of it went to your head today, Dad, or the converse of that. They had the same opportunities that I had. And the Republicans saw this as the enemy of making one party, one national party out of the Republican Party, which it is today, with its headquarters in the South, the border, and the sparsely populated western states. They did it by ending those kinds of relationships, which were critical to being good men, women, senators.
That is a very profound statement and quite an indictment. Is it still happening?
Yes, of course it's happening. Of course it's happening. They tell you, come to work on Tuesday and you can go home by Thursday. And you only have to do that maybe 2 or 3 times a month, you know? And then maybe only 8 or 9 months out of the year. No wonder nothing gets done.
So you're saying how critical the personal relationship.
Of course.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me push it. Did you have a decent personal relationship with Ted Kennedy?
Yes, of course I did.
You could work together?
Well, he would literally beg me to come on some of his bills because there were 17 of us who were progressive Republicans in the caucus, the Republican caucus that Ronald Reagan called the majority. And the gift of Ronald Reagan as president was that he chose George Bush as his vice president, got Jim Baker as his chief of staff, and you could read about that in here. And if you couldn't pass a bill from the Republican side of the Senate, which meant you couldn't get most of the 17 progressives on board, you'd have to call the White House. The leader would call the White House and say, "We can't do it, Mr. President." And Ronald Reagan would say, "Hey, don't sweat it. You know, we're batting 70%. That's not half bad."
So
You know, can you beat a president like that? You can't. No.
So your opinion of Ronald Reagan, he was pretty good.
Yes, he was. Of course he was. He's more conservative than I.
Yeah.
But he was a very good president.
Was he a leader?
He was a leader. Sure he was. Sure he was a leader. And leaders don't win all the time, you know. But leaders sort of set you on a track, on a trail. And they're first of all, they're honest. They're morally high character. All the things we don't have today in the person we call President of the United States.
So
they set a standard. It isn't their politics that's as important. It is who they are as people. And Ronald Reagan, George Bush, you know, set that kind of standard for Republicans.
Okay. Now you've given me a transition here. The question I really do want to ask you, 2 parts, okay? What do you think of the leadership of the current Republican Senate leader, Mitch McConnell?
It's sold out to the South. I mean, the values that are represented by, first of all, Mitch McConnell is just a good politician, pure and simple.
Okay.
He could be here or he could be there. But once they decided there was going to be the direction 30 years ago, you know, in effect in 94, 95, when they got the majority, he was there to deliver. He's still there to deliver. I don't think he respects this president at all. I know he doesn't respect him as a person, but, you know, he's a Republican, he does our law, da-da-da-da, So I don't think much of anything of Mitch McConnell. As a person, I like him as a person. Okay. As a leader, not the right person for this particular president.
I was going to ask you what you would do differently, but I think you've already answered that question. So we have a minute left. Senator, at this stage of life, one thinks about legacy and how they'll be remembered. If we got 40 seconds left, how do you want to be remembered for your public service?
I didn't let any grass grow under my feet. I seized every opportunity I could to do good for other people, not for myself. And that's the way I was raised. That's the way I operated. I was in an environment where other people were similarly motivated. I'm still being rewarded for that by the things that I do as a volunteer in the state of Minnesota and my community in St. Paul.
So you're still active. You
Of
don't
course.
have staff. You don't
No,
get
you
paid.
can't leave. You can read the paper in the morning or whatever you do. You know,
Yeah,
that's
but
right.
you're still out there
Right.
doing things. As I say,
Absolutely.
you don't get a paycheck and you don't have staff to help you.
Yeah.
Well, Dave Durenberger, thank you for being on the show.
My pleasure.
And thank you for giving us this legacy of your life and what it is to be a progressive
Thanks for
Republican
asking
in
me, Paul.
Minnesota.
I appreciate it.